एकम् अक्षरं हृदि निरन्तरं भासते स्वयं लिख्यते कथम् हृदय कुहर मध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रम् यहम् अहम् साक्षात् आत्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वता मज्जता वा पवनचलनरोधा आत्मनिष्ठो भवत्वम् देहं मृण्मयवत् जडात्मकम् अहं बुद्धिर्न तस्यास्त्यतो नाहं तत्तत भावशुक्तिसमये सिद्धात्मसद्भावतः कोऽहं भावयुत कुतो वरधिया दृष्टात्मनिष्टात्मना सोऽहं स्फूर्तितया अरुणाचलशिवः पूर्णो विभाति स्वयं सोऽहं स्फूर्तितया अरुणाचलशिवः पूर्णो विभाति स्वयं Namo Ramana. In this, the Thursday Satsang from Ramana Maharshi Center for Learning, as usual, we'll be reading 2 verses from the work Guru Vachaka Kovai by Muruganar Swamigal. Each verse reading will be followed by a short meditation on its meaning, and that will be followed by a 10-minute practice session of self-inquiry. After these 2 segments of verse reading, meditation on its meaning, and the practice of Atma Ucharan are completed, there will be summing up remarks by Venkatesh ji, and that shall be followed by an offering of Ashtotram, Sri Ramana Ashtotram. The chanting will be by Vaibhav ji and Pratnama. The floral offering shall be by Manjunath ji from right here. We begin this evening's satsang by taking the first verse selected for us, verse number 492. We find this verse in the segment Investigation into Truth. That is the first of the three segments: investigation into truth, meditation on the truth, experience of the truth. These three segments follow the prefatory verses. We find the verse 492 in the subsegment, the life of moderation. The life of moderation. Verse 492. God, the benefactor, who through his grace looks after all jivas, produces what is needed for their existence, but not in excess. God, the benefactor, who through his grace looks after all jivas, produces what is needed for their existence, but not in excess. If you therefore consume more food than is essential for your existence, then since this amounts to forcible theft through the consumption of food meant for other weaker beings, to whatever extent you eat in excess, to that extent sin will accrue to you. Muruganar, there is a note. Because nothing should be wasted, God only produces what is needed. Eating in excess leads to the accumulation of sin because the food meant for other beings is diminished, and this leads to their suffering. This is the reason why the great ones consider that a person who hoards essential things, especially food, in excess of what is necessary for him, he is storing up that amount of sin. So, to begin with, let us take the concept of waste, that how Bhagavan insists that one of the primary ethical practices that one should have is not to waste. There is an incident wherein some of the Brahmin ladies who are not very comfortable with the way in which the old stuff of previous day is cooked, is reheated and used as sambar and other things in the morning by Bhagavan. They do some cleansing and not eating and all those things. And when Bhagavan comes to know of this, he says all those orthodox rules are totally to be put aside in the face of the rule of not wasting. That the food that is consumable, that was left over the previous day, is properly heated, life is given back to it, but then it is not wasted. Therefore, that is the primary rule over all kinds of the pollution that is created by orthodoxy and with time and with sentimentality. All those rules are overruled by the rule of not wasting, is the principal factor behind this. And he attributes that, Muruganar Swamigal attributes that to Ishvara himself, that the Ishvara being the primary doer, that none of the jivas are the real doers, though we assume that we earn and we provide for ourselves. The reality is that the engine is the one which is driving the whole train. God, the benefactor, who through his grace looks after all jivas, produces what is needed for their existence, but not in excess. So there is enough to fulfill the want of, to fulfill the need of all the human beings, all the living beings in fact, but not to fulfill the desires or the excessive wants that we may build up. God has provided enough for everyone's need. He looks after and produces what is needed for their existence, but not in excess. If you therefore consume more food than is essential for your existence, then Since this amounts to forcible theft through consumption of food meant for other weaker beings, to whatever extent you eat in excess, to that extent sin will accrue to you. One incident where Ganeshananna narrates, I think it must be him, we can apply it to any other devotee also. When Ganeshananna takes a morsel of prasadam, which is now left for a monkey's portion, as is known to all of us, that in Bhagavan's Sannidhi, whenever a sweet or a eatable is brought, a very small portion is taken by Bhagavan, a small portion is given to the one who brought, and the rest is distributed among the people, as the rule of this verse says, that God has created not only for the person bringing the prasadam, or Bhagavan who is giving the blessings to the prasadam, but in fact for all, that Ishvara gives the food for all. In keeping with that rule, whatever is brought is distributed among all the people who are there. And in that distribution, in the last part of it, one morsel is left, one portion is left for the monkey. And when Ganeshananna or someone, I don't remember the name, when after taking his portion, he takes that also, then he receives a slap or something from the monkey, and Bhagavan does not side with him. He says that you shouldn't have taken the portion meant for the monkey, and that, of course, in all humility, the writer, the great devotee, narrates to us. There is another incident where this distribution is, many incidents where the distribution is properly emphasized by Bhagavan. Whenever a person serves him more, for instance, in one instance, Bhagavan would be having some kind of problem with his digestion, and the person serving the Narthangai Urgai, the one kind of citrus fruit pickle, which is supposed to be good for the stomach, he serves Bhagavan one more piece, and Bhagavan takes him to task and says that the moment you get the ladle in hand, the spoon of distribution in hand, your ego starts flourishing. How can you serve? You have disrespected me by putting this extra piece. Whatever is distributed to others alone should be given to me also, says Bhagavan. Of course, the verses we will find in Muruganar's verses, we will find quite a lot of strength, because strength in the sense that aversion towards what should not be done, because he is a sannyasi, though he has not taken the ordainment like that, he has lived as a sannyasi. And even when Bhagavan asks him to take his wife along in the spiritual journey, he doesn't agree. So many verses in Guru Vachaka Kovai we are going to find like this, that that which should be avoided, kept away from, but he is not going to use the words of Bhagavan, which is going to say that let go, hold the eye. He is going to be very strong, and he is going to use very harsh words, only for the benefit of the sadhaka, that one has to keep away from such practices which are detrimental to one's spiritual journey. Definitely, this is one of the sins mentioned in all the scriptures. The overeating is one of the sins mentioned in all the scriptures, because it is very clearly said here that you are eating the portion of others. And there are plenty of examples in India where poverty is spread over. We see the farmers taking their lives out of sheer poverty and the weight of debt burden. It should be very clear to us how we should have moderation in living. The moderation in living allows us freedom. See, the more we have particular interest. For instance, the 2 weeks back we had a meeting of our old batchmates from the bank. That was about 1985, we had all joined, and we are all having different interests now. So we meet once in a month to discuss whatever we are interested in now. And in that meeting, there was a particular type of hotel that we wanted to go. It was decided that that hotel alone should be sought, and that food alone should be sought. And nearly 3.5 hours in the morning was wasted just over that particular thing. That because the hotel had a queue and the queue did not end at all. And this kind of requirement that a particular type of food or overeating is definitely going to take away time from our sadhana. When there is heaviness in the stomach, obviously there is drowsiness in the brain. Practically speaking, we can easily feel it, how the blood distribution from the brain, how it moves to the stomach the moment the food is loaded. We can actually feel it. And the more we are doing Atma Vicharam, more clearer it will be how the drowsiness, how the clarity of brain helps and hinders. So the more food you are loaded up, the less time we will have for sadhana. So obviously, directly that adds up to the sin or that adds up to less time spent for vichara. And therefore, the moderation in food is something that is to be brought. And in this area, there is an incident by Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, where a child's mother, the child is having a lot of boils in his leg. His both the legs are filled with boils, and the mother brings him to Paramahamsa and says, "See, my child is eating lots and lots of good, lots and lots of what is that called? That is the jaggery, and he is not stopping even though his legs are completely filled with these kinds of sores." And Paramahamsa says, "You take him and bring him after 15 days. You bring him after 15 days. And then after 15 days, when the child is brought, Paramahamsa says, you should stop. You should stop eating good like this. See, it is detrimental to your health." And the mother is surprised, and she asks, "Why did you not give this Upadesha 15 days back itself?" And Paramahamsa says, "I myself have the habit of eating good with substances. So first I had to keep away from it for some time so that there is strength in my voice. There is satya to tell to others that he should keep away. And now it will work. You can go without fear," he says. And that is the case here. Only when we practice what we preach, there will be satya in the tongue. Otherwise, there will not be the truth. Now, the portion in the Jnana Marga is that where these rules are not directly told, we find Bhagavan in the case of Dandapani Swamigal, who is very huge. As it is, he is very well built and very heavy. And whenever food is made, Bhagavan says, "You keep more idlis for him, because for his size, that is what is required." So, what is moderate and what is required is to be judged by us by the impact it has on our sadhana. If our sadhana is impaired, is affected in the least, we should understand that we are overeating and it is impinging on our spiritual progress. So the terms of sin and punya may not be used that strongly in the Jnana Marga, but the effect is the same, that if the food taken affects our sadhana, and we should be alert to that. If it keeps us away from self-inquiry, immediately the necessary changes have to be made in the food, and that knowledge will come automatically. Because what affects you, if the mulagapudi that is there in our dining table, that affects me a lot. All the rest of them would be having mulagapudi, but it affects my digestion immediately. So what I do is I keep away from that, because if the digestion is affected, as Bhagavan says, immediately the dhyana or the freedom of consciousness appears to be affected. Therefore, we have to make our choices of moderation and keeping away from the stuff that impairs our Atma Vichara. That would be a way in which I can tell this point, that I cannot probably talk in terms of sin and the punya, but I can talk in terms of how food can affect our sadhana. And that is the way I would like to talk about this verse, that if food is affecting your sadhana, it will be easily known to us in the dhyana itself, in the vichara itself. The block will be known, the sleep will be excessive, the dullness will be there, the tamas will be there, and that can be treated as the sin. That the tamas, the dullness of excessive eating that blocks our vichara, can be called as the sin that we excessive eating. With Bhagavan's grace, let us sit in practice of Atma Vichara, which makes us alert automatically to what food is applicable to us, what food does not hinder our sadhana. That alertness comes with Atma Vicharam itself. So the practice helps us be aware of what is excessive and what is not. So let us sit in practice for 10 minutes. Ravatima, you will set the time for us. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramana. Namo Ramana. We continue the satsang by taking the second verse selected for us, verse number 828. We find this in the segment Meditation on the Truth, verse number 828. Before that, the clarification about the incident with taking the share of the monkeys by our previous president of the ashram, T.N. Venkatraman Mama. I think he has narrated that incident. Verse 828, the subsegment, the main segment is meditation on the truth. The subsegment is the greatness of renunciation. The greatness of renunciation. The path of sannyasa is like treading on slippery ground. Even if a slip occurs only in the mind, great harm is still sure to result. It is therefore the duty of the person who is walking on the slippery ground of sannyasa to ensure by vigilance that the perfidious pramada does not gain clandestine access into his heart. Muruganar, as pramada, forgetting the self, is the source of all other faults, it is the duty of the renunciant to ensure that it does not plunder his mind. Let me just look up the meaning of perfidious. Obviously, it's not something good. Deceitful and untrustworthy is the meaning. So let us go ahead with the verse. Deceitful pramada. The path of sannyasa is like treading on slippery ground. Whenever somebody is to take sannyasa, the one giving the diksha, of course, we learn from the many accounts of the great ones. The one giving the diksha cautions him against taking sannyasa as much as possible. Now, we hear many of the great ones being sent back to their old professions, to their education by the one from whom they seek the diksha, because the rule that the one giving the diksha has, as we learn from the various accounts, is that a fall from a small height can be bearable, can be recoverable, but a fall from great heights breaks us, and the recovery takes a long time, to put it mildly. That when one takes sannyasa, it is right at the apex of the ashramas. And if there is a fall there, if we have not worked out our vasanas enough, and if there is a fall there, we have enough examples before us not to doubt this statement of Muruganar Swamigal, that when a sannyasi falls from that height, it is terrible to even be a listener of that event, to even listen about that because we are in the same spiritual path, somebody in our path has a great fall, it hurts very deeply. What it must be for that person. So the path of sannyasa is like treading on slippery ground. Even if a slip only occurs in the mind, great harm is still sure to result. Usually we say that harm results from deeds. But 2000 years ago itself, it was said that more important than the deed is thought itself. That to think of a bad deed itself is the source of sin, is the source of error. So that is what is being cautioned by Muruganar. As I said, Muruganar himself is a sannyasi, so we can expect some strong words from him as we proceed here. The path of sannyasa is like treading on slippery ground. Even if a slip occurs only in the mind, great harm is still sure to result. It is therefore the duty of the person who is walking the slippery ground of sannyasa to ensure by vigilance that the deceitful pramada, that is forgetting the self, does not gain clandestine access to his heart. That at the level of thought itself, there is a correction. This is where the Bhagavan's teachings, which brings us the journey in sannyasa, irrespective of the role the body is playing. When we do Atma Vichara, we cross through the world of sannyasa. Whatever is the requirements of sannyasis, that world has to be crossed by the Atma Vichari, irrespective of what the prarabdha of the body is. Now, how Bhagavan does it for us is a wonder. That recently there was a quote put up by Venkatesh ji from the great sannyasin, the great yogi Shivanand Maharaj of Shivananda Ashram, the Divine Life Society. In that, towards the end, the quote is quite big. Towards the end of the quote, as I remember, he says, be still in the mind and then play the will of God, do the will of God. Now, Bhagavan would always say, one who is doing the will of God is the real sannyasi. One who is, he would say, the monkeys which live day by day and not have a house and live by the food that is given, they are real sannyasins, he would say. That means they are totally dependent on the will of God. Like that, the one who lives by the will of God can be called as the true sannyasin. Now, how do we know that we are acting by the will of God? And how does Bhagavan gives us this sannyasa? Though the body is still a householder, Bhagavan gives us real sannyasa. What is real sannyasa? Real sannyasa is to just carry out the will of God. If one is carrying out the will of God, that is true sannyasa. Now, because the sannyasi himself may have a doership which he has to eliminate by sadhana, whereas the one who is carrying out the will of God has eliminated that. Now, how beautifully Bhagavan brings us to that point is that he asks us to be still. Be still, he says. Whenever a thought comes, do not pursue it, but still the I thought by asking, for whom is this thought? Who am I? Let us meditate on that point, how Bhagavan gives us sannyasa. When the I thought is still, then in one sense, the world is going on and we are doing nothing about it, including everything. Everything is going on. So the moment of stillness of the jiva realizes that everything is happening by the will of God. And when one starts identifying with that stillness, that instead of Nandakumar identity, when one starts identifying with the stillness, then one's own movement, the so-called one's body, breath, and the ego, one's own movement is the will of God, one can directly perceive. When one has the identity in the stillness, the moment of stillness is realizing that everything is going by God's will. When we still the eye, everything is going by God's will. And when that stillness itself becomes the identity, the doership is completely gone and the sannyasa dawns there. The worry about slippages goes only when doership goes. So the traditional sannyasin who has taken the sannyasa diksha has to worry about this, has to worry about whether I have slipped, whether what is the slip that has happened in the mind. Oh, I should not have done this, I should not have done that. All those thoughts are removed in Atma Vicharam. So the slip and the regret and the fear about the slip is removed in Atma Vicharam. And what Bhagavan does, he makes us carry out the will of God. By carrying out the will of God, one is directly given sannyasa, or the without the body taking the sannyasa diksha, whatever its prarabdha is, let it be. But the limited consciousness called the jiva, from then on, from the time it identifies with the stillness, that has to come with practice. From then on, it realizes that everything is going on by God's will, and one moves, whenever one moves only impelled by God, only impelled by the Ishvara. Therefore, from stillness to stillness, one lives till Atma Vichara takes one to the source of Ishvara himself. The non-doership is also not the basis in which Atma Vicharam will leave us. When Atma Vicharam continues, the non-doership goes beyond that, beyond the triputi of the Ishvara, Jiva and Jagat. The Atma alone is, whatever the body may be, which is seen by others, when one identifies with this Purana, that is real sannyasa, that is reality. This is moderation, what we do, because we will be alert to whether it affects our sadhana. Directly, there will be an awareness, a sensitivity to the sadhana. And Bhagavan gives us sannyasa because we first start cooperating with God's will. As Shivanand Maharaj says, carry out God's will, he says. Now, how to carry out God's will? When you keep still, that stillness and everything is God's will. Then when that stillness is moved for some necessary action, Bhagavan says, one cannot say that I will not act. To say I will not act is also action. So when one is moved from that stillness, it is clearly experienced that the movement is by God's grace, by God's will, and merely carrying out God's will is true sannyasa. Bhagavan takes us even further, that even the division as God, world and the individual, it is removed in this Purana, in the Atman. The Triputi is removed and the Atma alone is there. There, of course, one is beyond all kinds of rules and regulations and ashramas and bondage and liberation. That is the state where one goes beyond bondage and liberation. And the Atma alone is, that is real sannyasa. There these fears, these rules do not arise. But so far as any sannyasi is taking up the practice of Bhagavan's teachings, then the dangers of the slippage in the mind, the thoughts going off to the negative, he should remain alert. And by Bhagavan's immense grace, we are given such wonderful gifts that what sannyasis alone are taught, we are made to practice directly. When thoughts come, Bhagavan says, observe them, ask for whom is this thought. So the moment you start observing thoughts, then alone you can know what is a slippage and what is not a slippage. And as Dilipji would say, we have to let go of not only the bad thoughts, we also have to let go of the so-called good thoughts to hold the Atman. So the Brahmastram of Atma Vicharam brings us the wondrous gift of sannyasa and takes us beyond to the Atman, where the reality is directly experienced, where these ashramas, bondage, liberation, all these are absorbed in the Atman. With Bhagavan's immense grace, which alone could have brought us to this direct path, let us sit in Atma Vicharam, which brings moderation directly, which brings the sannyasa, which is such a perilous and slippery path. It brings all the benefit of sannyasa directly here. That is why Bhagavan calls it as the Mahayoga. Atma Uchara is called as Mahayoga by Bhagavan. With his immense grace, let us sit in practice for 10 minutes. Revatima will set the time for us. Namo Ramana. I request Venkatesh ji to give us the summing up remarks. Namo Ramana, sir.
Namo Ramana. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurur Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve. We're doing manana on two very important aspects of our daily lives. One is the aspect of food. So if you look at our house, if we've been on the surface of the earth for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. And one thing that you realize that earlier there was never a concept of a refrigerator. There was no refrigerator at all, because whatever was cooked was consumed on the same day itself. So even nowadays also there are many households where they say food will not be stored. It will only be consumed the same day. So, but if you look at the refrigerator, there used to be small refrigerators. And then when we were in our childhood, we had single door refrigerator. Then it became a double door refrigerator. And now it has become a 4-door refrigerator, with 2 on this side, 2 on that side. Place to store and store and store more and more and more. So effectively what is happening? That we are actually keeping more than actually that we need. So food is to be stored where? Food has to go into our stomach. And the great ones say that when you fill your stomach, when you eat, you must eat only half of your stomach, because the other half is needed for the food to be moved around with the digestive juices, so that it can be consumed properly. But no, we want more and more and more. So when you go for a health program, everything, first thing they do is shut out your food. They'll say, Venkatesh, no food. First day has no food, second day you will get some kadlikai, some groundnuts you will get, third day also groundnuts. Then you will wonder why you are living, why do you have this life at all. But after the 10th day you will feel fantastic, bodily you will feel fantastic. Why? Because what has happened, the internal organs inside, it's like a factory inside. We don't realize it because we don't see it, but it's like a factory. Imagine a factory is working 24/7 and never stops. It's going to break down one day. So the factory also has breakdown. It also they put preventive maintenance and have breakdown maintenance. And then what happens? It's the factory keeps running. But we as human beings don't believe in that. We keep on consuming and consuming and consuming. So they say to really be happy, they say eat half. If you want to eat something, eat half. That's why in the olden days, they used to do bhiksha. Even Bhagwan will do bhiksha. Whatever comes in your 2 palms, that much of food is enough for your stomach. And eat half, walk double. You should walk double. More you should walk. And laugh a lot. When you laugh a lot, also you are happy. So mind, finally it's all a question of the mind. So mind is made, so we think mind is made up of thoughts. That is yes, but mind is also made from the subtlest portion of food. This is a very important thing we need to understand. The subtlest portion of food. Uddalaka tells his son, Swetaketu, he says, food when consumed becomes threefold. Food when consumed becomes threefold. The gross particles becomes excrement, because it becomes excretia basically, the gross particles. The middlings ones become flesh. All that waste that we put on, the waste becomes waist. That's what we say is waste. The middlings become the flesh, and the fine ones, the mind. This is very important. So it says, verily mind is food. So we think Food has not got an impact on our mind, it has a tremendous impact on our mind. And in the Chandogya Upanishad also it is said, by purity of food, one becomes purified in the inner nature. So by purity of food, you become purified in your inner nature. By the purification of the inner nature, one verily gets memory of the self. When you're cleansed inside, you get memory of the self. And by attainment of the memory of the self, what happens? All ties and attachments are severed. So it's important, very important thing is written in the Upanishads. He says that purity of food is very important because it takes you to the inner nature, it makes it purified. And then purification of that takes you to the memory of the selves of inside, where the self is. And memory of the self gets you away from all the attachments. So, the food is a very, very important thing, and like what Nandakumar said, everything has to be done in moderation. Any food, anything that you do should be in moderation, and especially food, because somebody has beautifully written, the vast majority of persons dig their graves through their teeth. I'll read this again. The vast majority of persons dig their graves through their teeth. See, if you go nowadays, earlier when we were young, there was nothing a concept of a paneer. But today, you go, man has invented so many dishes. Paneer butter masala, paneer this, paneer that. In paneer itself, there'll be some 50 dishes. Okay? So why? It'll make, oh, I like that. I tasted that last time. This time also I must taste it. I like that. So then what happens? You tend to eat more. That's why I always say, a lot of people say, I'm going to go for a buffet. A buffet. What happens in a buffet? Like the other day, we went for a holiday and there was a breakfast, lunch and dinner option. So you could choose to have all three meals in the hotel. Now, when you choose all the three meals, what happens? The dinner, they hardly charge you some 100 rupees more if you have breakfast and lunch. Why? They know if you eat a lot in breakfast and lunch, you can't eat dinner. So, but you'll think you'll get attracted. Oh, they're actually giving dinner for free, so I'll take dinner also. Then what happens? You will eat a lot. And then that's what happens, that's what Udalaka said, that the middle ones, the middlings will all become flesh in your body and you'll become fatter and fatter and fatter. And when you become fat, you cannot sit and do dhyana. You cannot do meditation. Because why? Your knees will be hurting, your back will be hurting, everything will be hurting, and you can't do sadhana. So it's important that we should not eat excess. Now, if you tell a human being, hey, tomorrow there is not going to be food, oh, he'll be very worried. Oh my God, there's no food tomorrow. But tell a monkey that, he'll say, what? What are you talking about food? My God, this God who looks after me, I know him, he looks after me, he will give me my food tomorrow. Look at the great trust in God that a monkey has. He doesn't have a house to stay, he stays on a tree, he doesn't know where his next meal is going to come from, but he's very happy, he looks after his young, and they're all very happy playing around. You see a monkey playing. Nowadays, our children have stopped playing like monkeys. Earlier, they used to play outside, but nowadays, children have stopped playing. But look at the monkey's children. They're all playing so happy. Do they know about the next meal? No, they don't. If we don't know where the next meal is going to come from, we will be really bothered. So that's a great lesson that we need to understand from the nature around us itself. The second thing that we were talking about is the sannyasa. So what do you mean by sannyasa? So sannyasa, many people say, is possessions. If you go to a lot of great ones, what they talk about possessions, they talk of it as dung, cow dung. They say possessions are like cow dung. They're like poison, dust, and they are like straw. They treat the possessions like straw. Why? They say beautifully, I read this, the world is mere a mela of 2 days. He says the world is just a mela of 2 days, and this body is a mere appearance for 2 seconds. I'll read this again. This has to be, the manana has to be done on this, and nididhyasana has to be done on this. This world is a mere mela of 2 days. Mela means it's a like a get together, have fun, a lot of music and things are there. It's a mela for 2 days, and this body is a mere appearance for 2 seconds. So, important thing we need to do is, as this, devotees of Bhagwan, says, what would Bhagwan do? If a question comes to your mind in any situation, what should I do? The first question should come, what would my Guru, whose feet, like Burganar said in this morning's satsang, Bhagwan's feet is on top of my head. His feet is on top of my head. So what first thought should come is, what would my Guru, what would he have done in this situation? And the answer will come out instantly from your intuition from within, that this is what your Guru would have done. And if you do that, it will be perfectly right. So that is the important thing that we need to understand. Sannyasa, people think it's instead of wearing a white cloth, I'm going to wear an orange cloth. Oh, very good. I'm going to have that Janavara, whatever it's called, the lanyard, Brahman lanyard, or I'll shave my head. Bhagwan says, all the great ones say shave the mind, not shave your head. Shaving your head is just the physical part of it. Shave your mind. Give up all the illusory feelings of I-ness. You have to give up all this of mindness, I-ness, which has been governing throughout our lives. Give up that. When you give up that, then you are moving towards God. You are moving in the sannyasa. The sannyasa is finally just a word. It's just a label. We see somebody in orange cloth, we think, oh, he's a sannyasa, he's a sannyasi. But what is going on in his mind? Anybody has seen? No, nobody has seen. What he does, see, they always say, what you do when you are absolutely alone determines who you are. So if you are absolutely all alone and you are established in God, that's when you are in a sannyasa. Not when you're with everybody else and wearing orange cloth. I've given this example many times of Shantanand Puri. Once I was holding his hand and walking back to his room after lunch, and he beautifully, he reached the room and he had this mala around his neck, big Rudraksh mala, big beads. Oh, he came to his room and said, oh, the drama is over. Now he removed all the malas and kept it on the bed. And he started laughing. He said, yes, this is a drama. There's nothing true about it. The truth is within. This outside show, I wear it because everybody they will see me and all like this, wearing all this mala, wearing these orange clothes and all. But what's more important is within. What is within is most important. So sannyasa is not something that you see outside. Sannyasa is what you are being. Your being is more important than what you're doing. So there are two great lessons today. One is of being, and the other one is doing everything in moderateness. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramanaya. Namo Ramana.
Namo Ramana. Thank you, sir. May I request Vaibhavji and Pratnama to start the chanting?
Yes. Namo Ramana. भारद्वाज विश्वनाथ विरचितम् श्रीरमणाष्टोत्तर शतनामावलिः अपार सच्चित् सुखवारिराशे यस्योर्मिमात्रं भुवनं समस्तं गुहाहितं तं रमणं गभीरं चिन्ताविहीनं विचिन्तयामि ॐ महासेन महंसेन जाताय नमः ॐ श्रीरमणाय नमः ॐ गुरवे नमः ॐ अखण्ड संविदाकाराय नमः ॐ महौजसे नमः ॐ कारणोद्भवाय नमः ॐ जगद्धितावताराय नमः। ॐ श्रीभूमिनाथस्थलोस्थिताय नमः। ॐ पराशरकुलोत्तंसाय नमः। ॐ सुन्दरार्यतपःफलाय नमः। ॐ कमनीयसुचारित्राय नमः। ॐ सहायाम्बा सहायवते नमः। ॐ शोणाचलमहोलीनमानसाय नमः। ॐ स्वर्णहस्तकाय नमः। ॐ श्रीमद्द्वादशान्तमहास्थले लब्धविद्योदयाय नमः। ॐ महाशक्तिनिपातेन प्रबुद्धाय नमः। ॐ परमार्थविदे नमः। ॐ तीव्राय नमः। ॐ पितृपदान्वेषिणे नमः। ॐ इन्दुमौळिना पितृमते नमः। ॐ पितुरादेशतः शौनशैलं प्राप्ताय नमः। ॐ तपोमयाय नमः। ॐ उदासीनाय नमः। ॐ महायोगिने नमः। ॐ महोत्साहाय नमः। ॐ कुशाग्रधिये नमः। ॐ शान्तसङ्कल्पसंरम्भाय नमः। ॐ सुसन्द्रशे नमः। ॐ सवित्रे नमः। ॐ स्थिराय नमः। ॐ तपक्षपितसर्वाङ्गाय नमः। ॐ पुल्लाम्बुजविलोचनाय नमः। ॐ चन्द्रिकासितहासश्रीमण्डिताननमण्डलाय नमः। ॐ चूतवाट्यां समासीनाय नमः। ॐ चूर्णिताखिलविभ्रमाय नमः। ॐ वेदवेदान्ततत्त्वज्ञाय नमः। ॐ चिन्मुद्रिणे नमः। ॐ त्रिगुणातिगाय नमः। ॐ विरूपाक्षगुहावासाय नमः। ॐ विराजदचलाकृतये नमः। ॐ उद्दीप्तनयनाय नमः। ॐ पूर्णाय नमः। ॐ रचिताचलताण्डवाय नमः। ॐ गम्भीराय नमः। ॐ परमाचार्याय नमः। ॐ सुप्रसन्नाय नमः। ॐ अभयप्रदाय नमः। ॐ दक्षिणास्य निभाय नमः। ॐ धीराय नमः। ॐ दक्षिणाभिमुखाय नमः। ॐ स्वराजे नमः। ॐ महर्षये नमः। ॐ भगवते नमः। ॐ ईद्याय नमः। ॐ भूमविद्याविशारदाय नमः। ॐ विमलाय नमः। ॐ दीर्घदर्शिने नमः। ॐ आप्ताय नमः। ॐ ऋजुमार्गप्रदर्शकाय नमः। ॐ समदृशे नमः। ॐ सत्यदृशे नमः। ॐ सत्याय नमः। ॐ प्रशान्ताय नमः। ॐ अमितविक्रमाय नमः। ॐ सुकुमाराय नमः। ॐ सदानन्दाय नमः। ॐ मृदुभाषिणे नमः। ॐ दयार्णवाय नमः। ॐ श्रीशोणाचलहृद्बोधस्कन्दाश्रमनिकेतनाय नमः। ॐ सद्दर्शनोपदेष्ट्रे नमः। ॐ सद्भक्तवृन्दपरिवृताय नमः। ॐ गणेशमुनिभृङ्गेन सेविताङ्घ्रिसरोरुहाय नमः। ॐ गीतोपदेशसारादिग्रन्थसञ्चिन्न संशयाय नमः। ॐ वर्णाश्रममतातीताय नमः। ॐ रसज्ञाय नमः। ॐ सौम्याय नमः। ॐ आत्मवते नमः। ॐ सर्वावनिमतस्थानाम् आराध्याय नमः। ॐ सर्वसद्गुणिने नमः। ॐ आत्मारामाय नमः। ॐ महाभागाय नमः। ॐ मातृमुक्तिविधायकाय नमः। ॐ विनताय नमः। ॐ विनुताय नमः। ॐ विप्राय नमः। ॐ मुनीन्द्राय नमः। ॐ पावकोज्ज्वलाय नमः। ॐ दर्शनादगसंहारिणे नमः। ॐ मौनेन स्वात्मबोधकाय नमः। ॐ मृच्छान्तिकरसान्निध्याय नमः। ॐ स्मरणाद्बन्धमोचकाय नमः। ॐ अन्तस्तिमिरचण्डांशवे नमः। ॐ संसारार्णवतारकाय नमः। ॐ शोणादृशस्तुतिद्रष्टे नमः। ॐ हार्दविद्याप्रकाशकाय नमः। ॐ अविच्युतनिजप्रज्ञाय नमः। ॐ नैसर्गिकमहातपसे नमः। ॐ कमण्डलुधराय नमः। ॐ शुभ्रकौपीनवसनाय नमः। ॐ गुहाय नमः। ॐ दण्डपाणये नमः। ॐ कृपापूर्णाय नमः। ॐ भवरोगविषग्वराय नमः। ॐ स्कन्दाय नमः। ॐ देवतमाय नमः। ॐ अमर्त्याय नमः। ॐ सेनान्ये नमः। ॐ पुरुषोत्तमाय नमः। ॐ श्रीरमण भगवते नमः। श्रीरमणाष्टोत्तरशतनाम पूजां समर्पयामि। यस्थानोररुणाचलस्य पदयोः स्मृत्याजनिं प्राप्यत दिव्यानुग्रह सुप्रवाह विवश सादात्म्यभावं गतः हृन्निष्ठस्वगभीर नित्यतपसा लोकान् पुनासेकराट् तस्मै श्रीरमणाय ते नम इदं लोकोत्तर ज्योतिषे। ॐ नमो भगवते श्रीरमणाय।
नमो नमो रमण सदाशिव प्रभावरण नमो महर्षि दर्शन सुख मंगल मुख सकल जीवहित सम्मुख ब्रह्म संज्ञे सदा तुष्ट सदा हृष्ट सदा शिवानंद पुष्ट परम महर्षि ब्रह्मनिष्ठ समदर्शी नमो नमो रमण सदाशिव प्रभावरण नमो महर्षि ನಮ್ಮ ಮನವದೊಂದು ಕಾಡು ನೀನರಿಸಿಹೆ ಅದರ ಜಾಡು ಹಿತವನರಿತು ನೀಡುತ್ತೆಮ್ಮ ಕೊರೆಯ ತಣಿಸಲೇ ಬೇಡಲೆಂದು ಬಂದ ನಾವು ನೋಡಿಯೇ ತಣಿವೆವಯ್ಯ ಮೋಡಿಗಾರನೇ ಹಿತವ ನುಡಿದು ಪೊರೆ ನಮ್ಮನು ಬ್ರಹ್ಮ ಸಂಹಿತೆ ನಮೋ ರಮಣ ಸದಾಶಿವ ಪ್ರಭಾವರಣ ನಮೋ महर्षि बोलो भगवान श्री रमण महर्षि की
जय
जय
नमो रमण अक्का ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮೋ ರಮಣ.